is because most people don't realize that they're a plant, an animal, and a mineral all at the same time. And that's important because inside the tissues of this animal are microscopic algae that provide most of their food. When the water temperature gets too high, the photosynthesis, the production of energy by these little plant cells, actually starts to run too fast, and they start to release toxins into the coral. As a method of survival, the coral will eject the algae into the water, and it leaves their tissues translucent, so you can see right through to the skeleton underneath, which is white. So it looks like it's bleached, it looks like it's dead, the tissue's actually still alive, but you have a sick coral that's starving and more susceptible to disease.
And is this bleaching event right now happening all over the globe? We know that it's centered in Hawaii.
Well, Hawaii is one of the worst areas being hit right now, but this year it has gone all over the globe. We've had reports coming in from the Persian Gulf, the Indian Ocean, Southeast Asia, all across the Pacific, and now what's made it global is the Atlantic Caribbean has joined in the choir. Florida, Cuba, the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, and now even starting up in Haiti and the Dominican Republic.
And what does that tell you? Because we know that El Nino right now is warming the waters in the Pacific, but of course the Caribbean is on the other side.
Right, but that's the interesting thing. Just like El Nino changes the climate around the world and has impacts on rainfall and drought, it also influences patterns of circulation that can affect temperatures of the water in other basins. So changes because of El Nino actually can cause temperatures to rise in the Indian Ocean and in the Caribbean.
Is there anything that can be done to stop an event like this once it's gotten started?
Once it's gotten started, no. I mean, we're talking about a huge amount of warm water, and there's just no capacity for cooling it. But the bigger question isn't this event. The bigger question is the root cause and how we deal with it in the long term.
And you see the root cause as what?
Climate change.
So this is the third one of these bleaching events that we have on record. Do you expect them to happen more frequently now as a result of climate change?
We have been expecting it, and unfortunately that's what's happening. The first global event was in 1998 related to a huge El Nino. 2010 was the next one related to a moderate El Nino. So the bad news is, despite my having told you how bad things are now, the climate models make it look like this event is not only going to continue, but may even be worse in 2016.
And is there any hope that the reefs affected will ever be able to come back?
It takes a long time. Reefs that were severely affected in '98, they're only partially recovering because some of the corals that died were hundreds of years old, and you can't regrow a 100-year-old coral in a decade or two. The real problem here is because of this increase in the frequency and intensity of bleaching events related to the increasing CO2 in the atmosphere, we really have to address the root cause of climate change, and the climate treaty negotiations going on in Paris in December are critical to that.
What does this mean for somebody listening in Cleveland or Indianapolis? Why does this matter to them if they're not somebody who goes and decides to snorkel among the coral and notices this time that it's not as colorful and beautiful as it usually is?
Yeah, that's always a question that comes up, but there is the inherent value of having places like the Great Barrier Reef and other coral reefs around the world. These coral reefs are only 0.1% of the seafloor, but they support over 25% of ocean fish species. These are areas that support about 500,000 people around the world who depend on the fish. They're protecting shorelines. The services provided by coral reefs is tremendous to many parts of the world. And so this is a very important system that we need to make sure is able to survive.
That's Mark Aiken, a marine ecologist and the coordinator of NOAA's Coral Reef Watch, and we'll link you to their study out today, this announcement that the world's coral reefs are in the middle of a dramatic bleaching event. That's at hereandnow.org. Mark, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And while you're at hereandnow.org, a program note, we spoke today with former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and I asked him what he thought about Republican presidential candidates who are denying climate change.
The truth of the matter is they just are factually wrong. I assume they're great Americans. I assume they really are trying to be honest. The scary thing is if you accept the fact that they really are honest, then you got to question their analytical ability and knowledge of what goes on. I'm not sure whether duplicity is better or worse than ignorance, but it's certainly one or the other.
We'll post our full interview with Mayor Bloomberg at hereandnow.org. Here and Now is a production of NPR and WBUR in association with the BBC World Service. I'm Jeremy Hobson.
I'm Robin Young. This is Here and Now. Funding for Here and Now comes from Lumosity.com, brain training designed by neuroscientists that has been used by 60 million people worldwide, with personalized training programs to challenge memory, attention, and problem solving. Learn more at Lumosity.com.
MDC Museum of Art and Design is Miami-Dade College's signature museum, located in the historic Freedom Tower in downtown Miami. MODE is known for exhibits by emerging and major figures in historical, modern, and contemporary art and design. The museum also houses the Cuban Exile Experience and Cultural Legacy Gallery, supporting exhibitions and programs that interpret stories and legacies of the Cuban exile community. MODE offers free admission and is open Wednesday to Sunday from 12 to 5. Details at mdcmoad.org.
Today's edition of The World is coming up in just a moment here on 91.3 WLRN, HD1 Miami, Fort Lauderdale, the Palm Beaches, and 91.5 WKWM, HD1 Marathon and Key West.
Herman Laverne Jones Theater South and the Orange Center bring The Eve of Jackie to South Florida October 14th through the 25th. Broadway's Chester Gregory stars in this high-energy theatrical performance with a live band about the life of R&B star Jackie Wilson. Information at archcenter.org.
Cleveland Clinic Florida's transplant program offers innovative care for disorders related to the liver, kidneys, and heart using the most advanced treatment options. But providing a second chance for patients in need of a transplant can only happen through organ donation. You can provide the gift of life and become an organ donor today. Cleveland Clinic Florida. Details at 1-800-639-DOCTOR or at clevelandclinicflorida.org. That's clevelandclinicflorida.org.
The time is 3 o'clock.
Helping coral reefs bounce back. Today on The World. Hi, Marco Werman. Coral reefs around the world are in trouble, but we can help.
In the long term, if we want to continue to have thriving coral reefs for centuries to come, we are eventually going to have to get a handle on CO2.
Also, the Ayatollah Khomeini's great-grandson.
If Iran, for instance, had a minor league for rising political stars, this young man would be the country's #1 prospect.
And speaking of stars, a professional video gamer who's a household name in South Korea.
Especially amongst teenagers. Like every teenager I met knew about Faker.
Plus, a Japanese businesswoman has an awkward conversation with her boss.
He said to me, "You need to tell me when you're having babies." And I was like, "Do you want me to tell you when I'm having sex?"
Those stories coming up today on The World.
Hello, I'm Sue Montgomery with the BBC News. The crisis engulfing world football's governing body FIFA has deepened with the suspension of 3 of its top leaders. The President, Sepp Blatter, the Secretary-General, Jérôme Valk, and the head of European football, Michel Platini, have been banned for 90 days. Richard Conway reports.
Sepp Blatter has been a force within FIFA for over 40 years, and since 1998 its president. Michel Platini, meanwhile, was widely considered to be FIFA's future, a former star player expected to sweep to power in next February's presidential election. Now their futures and that of FIFA look more uncertain than ever. FIFA say Mr. Blatter has been relieved of his duties for the duration of the ban, but there's no word yet on the immediate ramifications for Mr. Platini. It's unclear what will happen about his attempt to get the top job at FIFA.
Unnamed American defense officials say some of the Russian cruise missiles launched from the Caspian Sea towards targets in Syria crashed in Iran. An Iranian news agency reported that an unknown flying object crashed into a village. The Russian Defense Ministry says all its missiles reached their targets in Syria. The Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko has accused the Russian leader Vladimir Putin of wanting to create instability from Syria to Ukraine. He was speaking in a BBC interview.
He wants to have a global instability. 15 months ago, when Russian soldiers appeared in Donbass, and we presented the evidence of the presence of Russian soldiers and Russian regular troops together with the Russian-backed terrorists. And now, when it's appeared in Syria, the purpose is the same. Russia wants to destabilize the global security order.
European Union interior ministers meeting in Luxembourg have agreed new steps to increase the speed and number of deportations of failed asylum seekers. The measures include detaining those who may abscond before deportation. Members of Congress in the United States have condemned the German car maker Volkswagen over the emissions rigging scandal at the company. The chairman of the House Energy Committee said it was time for VW to clean up or get off the road. In response, Volkswagen's chief executive in the US, Michael Horn, blamed the deception on a few software engineers. Congressman Peter Welsh dismissed the explanation.
VW is trying to get the United States of America to believe these are a couple of rogue engineers. I categorically reject that. Either your entire organization is incompetent when it comes to trying to come up with intellectual property, and I don't believe that for a second, or they are complicit at the highest levels in a massive cover-up that continues today.
You're listening to the World News from the BBC. An American man regarded as a hero in France for preventing a terror attack on a high-speed train has been stabbed repeatedly in the chest in the U.S. city of Sacramento. Spencer Stone was one of 3 Americans and a Briton who in August managed to take down a gunman as he opened fire on a Paris-bound train. Tracy Trappini is from the Sacramento Police Department.
It is believed that the victim was out with a group of friends when a physical altercation led to the victim being stabbed multiple times in his upper body.
Lebanese security forces have used tear gas and water cannon to break up an anti-government demonstration in the capital Beirut. Protesters responded by throwing rocks and water bottles. The confrontation began after some demonstrators attempted to break concrete barriers put in to stop them overrunning the parliament building. A campaign which began against uncollected rubbish has developed into a wider protest at the political system. Lebanon has been without a president for 500 days. The international media tycoon Rupert Murdoch has apologized after facing a backlash on social media for his comments suggesting that Barack Obama was not, in his words, a real black president. The Fox News founder made the comment on Twitter while praising Ben Carson, a Republican presidential contender who is black. Mr. Murdoch later said he'd not meant to cause offense and found both Mr. Obama and Mr. Carson to be charming. Scientists say they've discovered why elephants rarely get cancer, even though their size and longevity should make them far more vulnerable. The US study says that elephants have evolved extra copies of a gene known as P53 that protects them against the disease. Humans only have 2 copies compared to the elephant's 38 versions in their DNA that nearly always ensure cancerous cells self-destruct. The researchers hope their findings could lead to new cancer-fighting therapies in humans. BBC News.
The World is brought to you by PRI with support from Lumosity.com. Brain training designed by neuroscientists that has been used by 60 million people worldwide, with personalized training programs to challenge memory, attention, and problem solving. You can learn more at Lumosity.com.
I'm Marco Werman, and this is The World. A lot to get to today on the show, but let's start with coral. Yep, coral. It's probably not the first thing that comes to mind when you're thinking about the big news stories of the day, but that's precisely why we want to kick things off talking about it. Like a lot of news about the world's environment, crises affecting coral reefs are almost always overshadowed by more breaking events, but corals are vital to the health of a quarter of the world's marine species. And scientists say right now they're in the midst of a serious global crisis brought on largely by climate change. Mark Egan runs the federal government's Coral Reef Watch program. And Mark, I understand that what we're looking at is another huge coral bleaching event. What is going on?
Yeah, Mark, what we're looking at is warm temperatures around the globe that are causing widespread bleaching of corals, and a lot of these corals are already dying.
So this is apparently the third major global bleaching event of coral in the last 20 years or so. What exactly is bleaching?
So corals are interesting because you can think of them like the children's game 20 question. Is it an animal, a vegetable, or a mineral? And the answer is all three. The animal has microscopic algae that live inside its tissues, and that helps to build the skeleton that makes the reef. Well, when the temperatures get too high, the photosynthesis in those algae actually runs too fast, and they start leaking out toxic compounds. The coral, out of self-defense, ejects them from their body. That leaves the corals looking white. They're still alive, it's just the tissue is clear and you're seeing the skeleton. But at this point, the coral has lost its main source of food and it's much more susceptible to disease.
So when we're talking a warming in climate change that's causing this bleaching, how much warming are we talking about? 10 degrees, a couple of degrees?
1 or 2 degrees Celsius. So somewhere between 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit and 3 degrees Fahrenheit. But now this is how warm it is above the normal warmest temperature of the year.
Corals have been around for millions of years, right?
Yes.
So I'm assuming they've encountered all kinds of temperature variations over those millions of years. Why are they so sensitive to what seems like a fairly small temperature change?
Well, it's a matter of rate. See, the corals have adapted to live at the upper end of their temperature range so they can, maximize the conditions in really warm water. But what we've been seeing in recent decades are events that drive temperatures up above their tolerances. And this has been happening repeatedly. And then events like this El Nino can just tip them over the top.
And you're kind of seeing the cause of this as this year's El Nino, the high temperatures?
It is a combination of climate change and El Nino. The bad part about that is we're now in a really strong El Nino, and our climate models are making it look like 2016, maybe even worse. We may be looking at losing 5% of the world's reefs permanently from this event.
And I gather there are lots of other threats to coral, right?
There are a lot of local threats, overfishing or destructive fishing practices, runoff of pollutants, habitat destruction. And so at times like this, when the corals are bleached, it's really essential that resource managers in areas look at how they can reduce these other threats so the corals have the best chance of surviving during this event.
So just to play the devil's advocate for a moment, what if we lose, say, a quarter of the world's coral? Remind us why these reefs are important.
About 500 million people, that's billion with a B, are dependent on coral reefs as part of their livelihood and a major source of protein. We have communities all around the world that are protected from major storm waves and from tsunamis by the structures corals build. And many of these tropical regions rely on tourists coming in to dive on the beautiful reefs. If the corals die, the habitat collapses, the fish go away, you don't have anything to attract people for tourism, and you also lose your fisheries.
So give us a look ahead. What do you see? I mean, you think next year could be worse? What about a few years down the line? Any hope for improvement?
There is hope for improvement, but the hope for improvement relies on a strong climate treaty in Paris in December. If we don't get a good climate treaty, corals are not going to have a long, happy future.
Mark Eakin there with the Coral Reef Watch Program at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in Washington. So, bad news for coral. What about some creative solutions to the problem? Michael Webster is a marine scientist and he heads the Coral Reef Alliance. If you take the Great Barrier Reef, the world's largest coral reef, is there any way to defend it from bleaching?
The answer to that is yes. We can't prevent bleaching events when we have a large El Nino like this at a large